She tries to find the human in her stories. Her passion is to provide a platform for the unheard people, the refugees, the minorities, the people with even mental health challenges. With Tara Kangarlou in this episode of MENA on the Map, we will go beyond the headlines.
Hello, Tara, and welcome to MENA on the Map. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on your new book, Heartbeat of Iran. I know you've been working on this project for the past 4 years now, and it was a big, challenging achievement for you. Tell me, why were you motivated this much for this project, and what does it mean to you?
Thank you so much for having me. It's so wonderful to be with you both. As Philip mentioned, it took about 4 years of reporting and writing to complete the heartbeat of Iran, and so much of it had to do with my own personal journey as an immigrant, as an Iranian woman, an Iranian American woman, and also as a journalist. I've worked with many different American news networks, and always I realized this lack of human perspective and human narrative on Iran, and quite frankly, not just on Iran, but many other countries around the world, including Lebanon, and elsewhere in the Middle East. And so for me, it was so important to capture the very human stories of everyday Iranians from different walks of life, because I do believe fundamentally that so much fear and anger and estrangement comes when people of different nations don't know each other. So it's quite key for any prospects of peace, growth, and engagement, to have the people's stories heard. So that's what you get with the heartbeat of Iran, really the intimate and personal stories of everyday Iranians who come from different walks of lives, whose hopes and ambitions and dreams and fears mirror so many others around the world. So it was a hard process. It was rigorous reporting involved, and of course writing, but it's here now.
I've been following the feedback on the book. Can you tell us how is the feedback in the UK, back in your home country, in the States? Tell me more about the feedback of people.
Of course. Philip, again, when you hear about Iran, the first thing that comes on are, the nuclear talks, angry men screaming, and probably, oppression and all these, negative thoughts. And quite frankly, the heartbeat of Iran, the purpose was not to give, this rosy, glossy image of the country, but rather a very human perspective onto how, what life is like in Iran. And there are many challenges that mirror the rest of the world. And so the feedback actually has been so welcoming and so warm, because this narrative has been missing, and this human perspective on Iran has been missing. And I remember, one time I was in Lebanon, maybe 6 years ago, and I was sitting at a restaurant, and this person started talking to me, and kept insisting that I tell him where I'm from. And I said I'm from the U.S. and just I'm American. And he's like, no. Your eyes, you're not American. And I said, you know what? I'm Iranian. I just didn't want to get into that Iran conversation in Lebanon. And then he immediately said, oh, Ahmadinejad. And that was such a poignant moment. That was such a poignant moment for me, because I realized that it's not just in the UK or US or, the Western world, but even in the Middle East, places that are not so far away from Iran, the only image that exists of Iran is a very narrow political lens through the government. And the mission of this book is to give that distinction that, the Iranian people are quite separate than the government. And those stories are so important to be captured. So the feedback has been really positive, because that narrative is not existed on Iran so much. And I always say Iran is a country of 80 million human beings, not 80 million nuclear heads. And that distinction is so important to be made.
Tara, personally, I had a similar experience. I was studying, and I wanted to write my thesis about Hezbollah. And from Hezbollah, I moved to like understanding the Iranian regime. And from there, I got to understand the Iranian culture. And personally, I'm in love with Iranians. I'm in love with the culture. I'm in love with the people. A perception that we didn't have in Lebanon. And being a Lebanese, we had a different perception. Iran was very much linked to the regime, and as you mentioned, all of these stereotypes. But I would like to go more into details into the stories that you featured, into the perception or the stereotypes that you tried to tweak, to change, or to highlight the importance of communicating and talking to the people, understanding that they're not, and unlabeling people.
Of course. No, absolutely. The book is a collection of 24 intimate stories of people from different walks of life. And I try to be as diverse and broad with the individuals I choose, because like many people have told me, again, this is one of the feedbacks, the heartbeat of Iran is Iran within Iran within Iran. So each story is not just about one person or one individual, but it's really about the many layers of socio-cultural, economic, political, religious, fabrics of the society. The people in the book come from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different, socioeconomic backgrounds. And that's important because I take you into today's Iran, but also Iran of 100 years ago, but also, yes, the Persian Empire of 3,000 years ago. And in the book, I try to use individuals and stories that would give you that diverse and broad perspective. And just to give you an example here, I tackle the LGBTQ community. I tackle, religious diversities, religious minorities, women's issues, female athletes. One of my favorite stories is a story of a saffron farmer who's working on the dry lands of Khorasan. And in his story, you're not just hearing about saffron or learning about that, but rather you're learning about a story of a young man trying to make ends meet under incredibly hard economic conditions, and also dealing with environmental issues. As many know, including yourselves, Iran is facing a lot of environmental challenges, and that was something I wanted to tackle. Another good story that I think you would find interesting, or I think my American audience has, is a story of a rabbi. Iran has had a large Jewish community. In fact, it has the largest number of Jews living in Iran, in the Middle East, outside of the state of Israel. And not many people know about that. So it was important for me to kind of shed light on what life is like for them, for the Jewish Iranians in Iran and other religious minorities, but at the same time, simultaneously tackle the challenges that exist, the restrictions, the many hurdles that people have to endure on a daily basis. So there are many stories, many layers, and again, it's not just about one individual, but rather layers and layers and layers of this very complex and nuanced society.
Tara, just to continue on this, because you mentioned individuals, Tara, how important do you think to bring back the human as the center in news reporting and in journalism in general, especially now with you said something really interesting, that we don't have 80 million nuclear nukes in Iran. We have 80 million individuals in Iraq. So in general, in reporting, in covering stories, how important to bring back the human as a center?
Absolutely. I think in any form of journalism, whether it's print, television, any type of storytelling, it's about people. It's about the individuals that their lives are being affected by whatever it is that we're covering as writers, as journalists. And again, ultimately, it's about a nation. Whatever policies that come out of Washington, elsewhere around the world would have a direct impact on the lives of these 80 million human beings, individuals, right? And I think it's so important that the people always remain the center of any story, again, around the world. As a journalist, it's been one of the most humbling experiences of my career, because you're seeing, hearing, and feeling things from a vantage point of individuals who are being affected by whatever it is that you're covering, right? So it's always about people. It's always about that human narrative. And again, like you mentioned, when people hear about Iran, or when they, when they think about Iran, the first thing that comes to their mind is the government, their regime, their behavior, and the last is really the people, the culture, and the society. And I think human narratives and perspectives are so important.
Tara, politically, are you allowed to visit your home country, or there are some constraints for this?
No, and Philip, that's such a emotional topic for me, because as a dual citizen, as an Iranian American who has worked with American news organizations, I'm not the most welcomed person in Iran, unfortunately, by the government. And I would assume so, because, of past experiences. And I actually talk about this in the introduction of my book, that despite my own situation, despite my own condition of not being able to return to my own country because of my work as a journalist, I still believe that it's important to see Iran beyond these specific and narrow narratives, because I'm a very unique case when it comes to this, just because of my work, and but there are millions of others who commute in and out of this country.
But this book should be regarded as a gift to the Iranian country, as a country, because you are shedding the light on stories. You're trying to change the misconceptions. So you're doing a great favor for your nation. Don't you think you should be recognized, or maybe give you credits from your own country for this work? Because it's going worldwide, and you're making these people, these guests in the book, you're making them famous by telling their stories.
That's so interesting, Philip. I think any other country may have seen it this way, but perhaps not the government in Iran. And I never thought of it that way. In a way, yes, it is a service to my people, my nation, and that is different than the government, if that makes sense. Because the government is its own little world. It's different than the government, than the people. And you're right. I mean, Iranian people in Iran are excited about this book. They love any opportunity to dismantle these stereotypes, these negative narratives that exist on the people. So of course, it is in a way a service to the people and the nation. But unfortunately, again, the government is not necessarily welcoming of these new horizons and openings. So
yes, if you were to pick one personality and be able to see it now, who would you pick from your book to meet them face to face?
Of course. One of the most beautiful people that I interviewed for the book is this young woman by the name of Sima Raisi. She is a 30-something-year-old Baluch woman. She's an environmental activist. She lives in the poorest state of Iran, Sistan, Baluchistan, bordering Pakistan and Afghanistan, from the east. And she just finished her PhD, and she's blind. And in her story, I managed to take my readers into, some of the most underrepresented parts of Iran, but also tackle the many challenges that people with disabilities, people who come from marginalized communities face, but also amplify the beauty of one of Iran's oldest tribes and, ethnicities, which is, the Baluch, culture, and also talk about the Sunni Iranians and, the fact that in Iran, as many think, of course, the majority is Shia, but there are also Sunni Iranians who live in this country, and sort of unpack this false illusion, this whole Sunni Shia issue that America loves to bring up. I think it's so important that the world understands that the rivalries and issues that we see in the Middle East really don't have much to do with a battle of Karbala that took place 2,000 years ago, but rather with political issue, political, thug of war that exists. And so that was so important to me. It's not about ideology or religion, but rather about politics. So this young woman's story really unpacks so many layers for us, but at its core, it's a story of a beautiful, resilient and talented young woman who is rising above every single challenge and adversity with the support of her family.
Just to answer Philip, I don't think the Iranian regime was ever interested in promoting diversity in Iran. So I think it's also challenging for Tara on this level to promote the book in Iran.
Oh, for sure. And also, listen, I mean, I wrote the book for an American audience, for a non-Iranian audience. The book is not meant for Iran. The book is not meant for Iranians. The book is meant for a non-Iranian audience. So, the same way that you go on Netflix or, you go to a bookstore and look, for something on Iran, you get, Not Without My Daughter, Argo 300,
yes.
This new show called Tehran, which is about, nuclear plants and all that. My goal is, so you have something different, something that's human, something that is personal and intimate, that gives you the many nuances and colors and textures that exist in this society from a human perspective.
Also, going back to your work as a journalist, you embraced a new type of journalism that also is mixed with activism. You do groundwork, you go to the field, and you've initiated Art of Hope as an initiative. I would like to learn more about your experience with the refugees. There's borderline between journalism and activism, but at the same time, when we want to bring back the human as the center of the story, there are actions that should be done. What can you tell us about your experience, and where can you draw the line between these two different approaches?
Oh, that's such a great question. And it's something that, is so important to me. I mean, I was trained, as a journalist, always taught that, you're a storyteller, you're a reporter, you're not an activist. And I completely abide by that and have always remained a journalist and reporter when I'm doing that, right? And it's something that, again, we in the United States, working with, credible news networks, always try to pursue. I mean, that's how it is, accuracy, balance, and fairness. However, I think when it comes to humanitarian issues, issues that are so blatant that are wrong. I mean, no one can argue that human trafficking is wrong, right? No one can argue that using women and girls and sex as a weapon in war is wrong, right? There's fundamental issues that are wrong, right? So I think that's when historically many journalists, at least people that I know and colleagues, have spoken and been active in that space. But for me, as you both know, I spent a lot of time in Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey, and I covered the conflicts in Syria and Iraq and the impact of the large influx of refugees in host communities. And as a reporter, every single story that I covered, fundamentally at its core, again, had to do with individuals, personal stories. Young children who were uprooted from their livelihoods, but also young children in the host communities that are extremely fragile. And over, the issue of PTSD and trauma and mental health came up. So for me, after I left my last network in 2016, Al Jazeera America, I decided that, I want to use all the knowledge that I have on the topic from the field, from my reporting, and sort of weaponize that into impact, to have some sort of a positive change and support for these children that I met, because it really was difficult to let go of all the stories and challenges that I've heard about in my work. And so I created Art of Hope. It's a nonprofit organization. It's US based, but we work with grassroots organizations on the ground. And I decided to work in Lebanon because and support grassroots organizations because, as you know, Lebanon has the highest number of refugees per capita. It's probably perhaps the most vulnerable host community in the region. And so I wanted to tackle the issue of trauma and PTSD among this population, among the refugee population, as well as the vulnerable host community. And so it's something that I do as a passion project, but all of it is really as a result of my work as a journalist.
Tara, before closing, I just want to tell Yara and our audience something that people don't know. After August 4th, a huge explosion in Beirut, Tara calls me and she was in tears. I mean, she visited this country and she loved Beirut so much that she wanted to do something to help Lebanese people after this explosion. And this is where I always touch the human side inside Tara. And also she came and she made like on-ground tents to help people and to distribute hygiene kits. So that's a great work for not only a journalist. So you've had many hats, Tara. And by this note, I would like you to end our discussion today. We give you the floor. You have 1 minute.
Thank you so much. And I think so much of it is because I can't do much in my own country. And if I can do something for the region, for my friends, my brothers and sisters, why not? So I see so much of my own roots in Lebanon, in other countries in the Middle East. So I think fundamentally, a story is about someone telling another, this is how I feel, this is what I see. Do you see that? Do you feel that? And if only we as people see more of what others see, this world would be a better place. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Tara, thank you so much for joining us on MENA on the Map that is going live from our Ideas Incubator, the Now House, here in Amman. And this is an invitation for everyone to check Art of Hope, to check your work, and to be able to support in this, in anything that people can support, volunteering or contacting you, to be able to help the most vulnerable people in this region. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Tara.